I picked up some equipment months ago and I finally have time to take a better look at them. Sometimes things don't go the way we planned them to, and these two had to be pushed aside to make way for other projects. The biggest reason is that the mowing season comes on pretty quickly at the beginning of spring, and when friends and family ask for your help, personal projects like this one have to be put on hold until you get more time to work on them. Now things have finally cooled off a bit, so it's now their turn to be looked at. Before we take a closer look at this stuff, we need to go back to when we first got these two, which I hate to say was several weeks ago, or maybe even more. We'll start with the mower. Now, I picked this up from my uncle who stopped using it. It looks to be in really good condition, except the sun really took a toll on it. However, it is one of my favorite mower brands, so I was really interested in working on it. Now, I do have high hopes for it, and I was worried as to why it was given away, but I hate to say it, finding out why it was given away is probably the best part of diagnosing things. The first thing I'm going to do is to look it over and see what kind of condition it's in. The biggest issue that I can see is that it is extremely sun-bleached, meaning it was left outside uncovered for some time. The sun has taken a toll on not just the paint, but also the stickers as well. At least the information sticker is okay, and that's only because it was underneath this rear door. In fact, it's been sitting outside for so long it had its own ant colony living inside it. Now, more than likely, there's also going to be a lot of grass stuck under the mowing deck. The more I look at this thing, the more worried I'm getting, and the reason is going to be very apparent here in a minute. Now, there is some gasoline in the tank, so more than likely the mower hasn't been sitting for several years, more like 1 or 2, but we won't find out until we drain the fuel tank. Now, to get an accurate reading on the oil level, remember to wipe the dipstick off first and then reinstall it back into the engine. And the news is not good. I don't see any oil on it, which means it was either emptied when they stopped using it, which is very unlikely, or there's a massive oil leak somewhere around the motor. We'll take a closer look here in a minute after we take a look at the underside of the mowing deck. So it's not terrible, but it's not good news either. It would appear that it had never been cleaned while being used, but if that was the case, why isn't it packed full of grass? What typically happens is while it's being used, some of the grass will eventually fall off and get mulched with the rest of the fresh clippings. What's left is a lot of rust and patches of dried grass. Now, the most troubling sight is what's right underneath the engine, which is a lot of oil and dirt. Now, that could mean that the oil leaked past the bottom seal, and to fix it, we just have to replace the seal. The problem, though, is that I fixed oil leaks on a Kohler before, and it wasn't the oil seal that was leaking, but the sump gasket. Now, it's kind of hard to film because this area is sandwiched between the mowing deck and the upper part of the engine. The biggest giveaway that there's a leak there is that it's dirty everywhere else on the engine except where the leak is coming from. The reason this happens is that the leak is flushing away the dirt. I hate to say it, but we might be too late saving this one. If the previous owner wasn't paying attention, they could easily keep using it, and in the situation, the engine is not going to last long without oil in the engine. Next, I'm going to squeeze the brake handle and then slowly pull on the rope. I know this is not an accurate test of an engine's compression, but it's a good way to see if it might be worn out. And I hate to say it, but it's way too easy to pull on this rope, so it may not be worth fixing. While I think long and hard about my life choices, I'm going to take a closer look at that edger. So this edger was found on the marketplace and was being given away by a gentleman who for some reason didn't want to give me his address. He only told me the general area he was located at and pretty much said, good luck finding it. After 2 attempts, yeah, that's right, I went out twice, about 2 hours apart to try to find this thing. Apparently in that time, the other people who were also looking for it didn't find it either because I finally found it on my second attempt. Now, the gentleman only gave me the crossroads of 2 major streets, and I had to drive around quite a bit to try to find this edger. It turns out they lived half a mile down the road from the intersection. The worst part was that they didn't even leave the edger at the curb so it would be visible. Instead, they left it in front of the garage. I will say this, they made it very challenging for me to try and find it, but to be honest, I really wish I hadn't found it. I think this was left outside after each use without any sort of cleaning. If they didn't bother storing it properly or cleaning it, what sort of maintenance do you think was given to it? It looks like we've got 2 pieces of equipment that have been severely neglected. I just hope I can get either one of them working again. Now, it's still worth a shot trying to see if we can get them running again, no matter how bad they might look. You never know, one of them might be salvageable. Besides, if I can't get them running again, the parts on them still have some sort of value. After taking off the gas cap, there's still some gasoline in the tank. I can't tell if it's still good, but there's a good chance it might be. They might have put fuel into the tank, tried to start it, and when it didn't start, decided to use it as a lawn ornament instead. Now, it would be a miracle if it started and ran, but I guess we won't know unless we try and start it. I wouldn't mind putting this engine on a go-kart or a mini bike because, to be honest, I don't have a real need for an edger like this. However, it does seem to work like it's supposed to. The only issue I have with it is that these are pretty hard to sell, as most people feel the same way about these things. I guess I'll make my decision later on. So of course it didn't start. That's typically the way these projects go. I stopped the project for a few weeks because I had other projects show up, but once those were taken care of, we can now continue with the diagnostic work. The next thing I want to do is confirm that the engine will even run. If it can't do that, there's very little point in continuing. What I'm going to do is put some fuel into the carb's throat and then try starting it. So luckily the engine started and ran for a few seconds on the fuel that I put into the carb's throat. The problem though is that it didn't stay running, which means we either have a carb issue or the fuel in the tank is bad, but at least we know that it runs. However, I have to push this project out to a later date again due to other work showing up. I do want to finish looking at the Toro though. So what I've come up with so far is I suspect the reason why the engine doesn't have any oil in the crankcase is because there's a leak in the front of the engine. The only issue is that the majority of the engine is covered in dirt, so it's going to be quite difficult to pinpoint where the oil is coming from. For those of you who have watched my videos before, you know what I have to do. Before I try and start this engine, I need to put oil in it, but I also need to use that oil to pinpoint the leak if there really is one. Now I could use my pressure washer to clean it, but I'm going to clean it by hand because it uses less water and I have more control. If you want to use your pressure washer, be my guest, but I do prefer this method. The most likely place for the leak is right under the cylinder, which is going to be very difficult to clean and worse yet to film. I also want to take this opportunity to remove the drive belt cover to clean whatever might be underneath it. From the side, I can see what looks like to be dried grass, so I have a feeling it's going to be packed underneath the cover, which I hate to say is not good news for the paint as it could hold moisture. Now, there are only 2 screws holding the cover to the deck, but you have to get to them from the bottom. After removing the cover, it turns out it was very packed and it's also holding a lot of moisture. That means we're going to have to remove all the grass clippings and hopefully the paint hasn't been damaged yet. Unfortunately, after removing some of the clippings, it turns out the paint has been damaged, so it's quite a shame. After getting rid of the majority of the clippings, it looks like we'll need to scrub the mowing deck to get rid of the rest of the dirt. The degreaser I'm going to use was recommended by some of the viewers and I'm finally going to get a chance to use it. I've been using a different degreaser and I hate to say it, it wasn't really cutting it. It was doing a fine job, but it had to work really hard to get okay results. After spraying the dirty parts, I'm going to scrub it to help break through the dirt and oil. I would normally use my wider brush, however this scrubbing is going to take a lot of force and the old brush does a better job of doing it. Now since I'm not 100% sure where the leak is going to be, I have to clean pretty much everywhere around the engine so I can find it. Now for the rinse, you could use a garden hose, but I simply don't need that sort of volume or even pressure. Since I'm dealing with dirt and oil, the degreaser and scrubbing is doing an effective job at releasing the dirt. Now the dirt and oil that's on either side of the engine is putting up quite a fight. It took a couple of rinses to finally get rid of the dirt and oil off of it. If I wasn't filming and I didn't have the camera in the way, I would probably rinse and scrub at the same time versus taking turns. As you can see, after the first rinse, the stuff on the base of the engine is still covered in dirt and oil. Now this would eventually require more of the spray and still more scrubbing, but to be honest, it did a better job than the other stuff I was using. I think the other side turned out really well, and I hope this side will look just as good, but there's so much stuff in the way that it's going to take a couple of rinses to finally get it looking okay. Once the engine is clean and somewhat dry, I think it's finally time we get some oil into the engine so we can do our test start. Now, I'm not going to waste perfectly good oil in a leaking engine, so I'm going to put used oil in it instead, and there's a really good reason why. Used oil will make it easier to see the leak versus if it was clean oil. I still want to check the oil level, and that's because I want to make sure there's enough oil to reach the spot where it's leaking. Now that I know there's plenty of oil in the engine, all we have to do is wait. So it's been a few minutes, and so far I don't see any signs of a leak on the right side of the engine. To be honest, I was hoping it was going to be the dipstick that was leaking because it'd be a lot easier to fix. It's the same story on the left side of the engine too. Like I said, the mower is mostly dry. There are a few spots of water here and there, but we're looking for dirty oil and not water spots. Now that only leaves us the front of the engine, and what do you know, it looks like we have a couple of dirty oil trails. I've sped up the video so it makes it more obvious that it's leaking here. Unfortunately, that means this project is going to be put on hold until we can fix the leak because this looks pretty serious. However, we can still put some fuel into the carb's throat and see if we can get the engine to start and run for a few seconds. Since there's some fuel in the tank, there's a good chance that if we get it running, it might stay running, which would then confirm that we have good fuel, a working ignition system, and a functional carb, but with my luck, none of that's going to happen. So the good news is that it started and ran for a few seconds, but the bad news is it didn't stay running, which means we've got to figure out why. At least we know the engine has the capability to run, and that means this project can move on to the next step. Another option as to the oil leak would be a crack in the block, which I hate to say it, but if that was the case, we'd have to replace the engine. So my question is, would you even bother trying to fix an oil leak, or would you put it on the curb for the next person who has more time to fix it? Personally, if I didn't know how to fix it, I would just give it away, but since I think I can fix it, I'm going to give it a shot. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions about this project or your own projects, and I hope to see you in the next video.